Hello there, Atheist Junior here, your friend and humble narrator, and I'm back with a new video. And today I'm going to be doing another debate review, but we have a special guest with us, Horazio. So
No.
you actually debated Kent before, and you saw my debate review I did
Yeah.
about your debate, which I thought was really good. So
Thank you.
what was your experience like in that debate?
It was exactly what I expected it to be, like just throwing out stuff at him and counterpointing what he was saying, and he just evading. Actually, at the beginning, what I told Donnie when I reached out to him, which I thought he would never come back to me because no one knows me. I thought he was just like allowing YouTubers and people that have a following to the debates, and I was surprised that he accepted. And I was like, my approach would be, I want to go over Kent's counterpoints to evolution and then fact check those and you know review that. And he was like, no, Kent's not gonna be up for that. How about you just go with this topic, which I think was good because it was about diversity of life rather than evolution per se. And I thought that was a good approach, because that way he would not have that wiggle room to go to other topics and all that. But anyway, he's really good at that. So if there's something that I can commend him for, is that he's very agile in his mind to go to whatever he already knows and known terrain, and just repeat himself to death.
Yeah, I definitely agree. So you and me both saw Kent's debate against Grayson
Yeah.
and thought it was really good. So I think what we're going to do is we'll watch his opening because it's pretty short, and then we'll just sort of skip ahead to the open discussion because I don't think we need to subject ourselves to watching Kent's intro because we already know what it's going to be.
Exactly.
Okay.
Grayson, we're going to hand it over to you. And whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
Okay, perfect. So tonight, I'd like to focus on how DNA sequence homology proves evolution and common ancestry. So using a genetics test, we can tell if two samples are siblings, i.e., they share a recent common ancestor in their parents. Now, sequence homology is definitive proof of relation between people in a court of law, and it counts as concrete scientific proof of relationship. Every legal court and scientific paper in the world accepts this, and so does Kent. We can take any three humans on Earth and use genetics to prove that person A is more closely related to person B than to person C. In other words, we have just proven that person A shares a common ancestor with person B more recently in the past than they do with person C. Creationists like Kent will agree with all of this logic. After all, they believe every human shares a common ancestor in Adam and Eve. But somehow, Kent wants to draw a line to say that for some reason, this exact logic, which stands as proof of relationship in legal courts and which he agrees for human lineages, for some reason, Kent will say that this does not apply between species. He will say that you can't look at the sequence homology in the DNA of humans and chimpanzees to say that this is clearly proof that they share a common ancestor. Species A is most similar to species B, but for somehow they can't share a common ancestry because reasons. So we're going to get into those reasons tonight. Kent's primary argument here is that humans and chimpanzees are different kinds of animals. He will say that the Bible defines kinds as two creatures that can bring forth, i.e., reproduce. Although by that logic, Kent and I would be different kinds.
Okay, I love this argument. And I love this opening statement so far because I see a lot of debates where people do opening statements and they'll give a lot of examples of things that are evidence of evolution. But I think it's better to attack Kent's logic and Kent's understanding of evolution and put the burden back on him to explain it and show why his understanding of evolution is wrong, because he's not going to accept any of that evidence. So I think that's a bit of a waste of time. I like this approach a lot more.
Yeah, and the only thing that I would disagree and that I don't like, and especially with Kant, is going to those legal and court of law stuff, because it's been told to death, like legal courts are not the same as science. So they work in a very different way. So allowing him to grab onto that and say, "Yo, no, this court of law, that would be thrown out." Yeah, but this is not a court of law. And I told him that in my debate, like, this is not law. The job of an attorney in a court of law is, whether it's true or not, prove a point or convince others of a point. And this is not what needs to be done here. These debates are not for that.
Yeah, well, I agree, but at the same time, Kent kind of, he's going to force those arguments on you. So I can see the strategy of trying to undercut him and sort of get there first and explain why that's not a good argument in the opening. So I can see what you're saying, but I can also see where Grayson's coming from as well.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Cover that ground before, right?
Yeah.
As Kent, I assure you that no matter how hard the two of us try, we will not be able to bring forth together. But on a more serious note, this definition of kinds is completely self-defeating to Kent's own argument. For example, Kent wants to say that Chihuahuas and Great Danes are both the same dog kind. And yet Chihuahuas and Great Danes cannot reproduce naturally. It is physically impossible for them to have sex. And even with artificial insemination, a female Chihuahua cannot survive the pregnancy. And yet, Kent will say they are both the same dog kind still. So clearly, if both Chihuahuas and Great Danes are the same kind, but they cannot bring forth, then being able to bring forth is not a good definition for what Kent is referring to as a kind. I imagine that if one day scientists are able to create a human-chimpanzee hybrid, that Kent will not then say that this makes humans and chimpanzees the same kind. And yet, when breeders intervene artificially to create a Great Dane Chihuahua mix, Kent will gladly say that this is evidence for them being the same kind.
So I just wanted to add that I was curious about this, and I actually Googled it, and it is possible there are Great Dane Chihuahua hybrids that exist.
That would be funny.
Yeah, it looks, it's a small dog that looks kind of like a dachshund or a corgi. It's kind of that size. They don't really look like either, but it is possible. Like he said, you have to have the Great Dane, I think, mother has to get pregnant. But I looked it up, and there are actually pictures on Google. They're kind of, I've never seen a dog that looks like that, but they do exist. So just wanted
but
to
that would bring like a lot of issues, right? To Kent's point, they will not survive on the wild.
Yeah, well, that's a really annoying point that he brings up, because whether or not they can survive in the wild, it doesn't hinge on whether or not that is evidence for evolution. But that's why there's a distinction between artificial selection and natural selection. So of course, if you artificially select different dog breeds, of course they're not going to survive in the wild, because they didn't evolve in that environment.
That's not their niche, right? So if you take them out of their niche, whatever animal you're talking about, they're going to not be able to survive or thrive, or they might develop different traits.
And there are wild animals that can't live in zoos. They don't live well in captivity. They have to live in the wild, or they can survive, but they'll be really depressed, and like you said, they can't thrive. They don't want to breed, and they don't do well, because that's not what they're used to. Like some animals can, but it's not a good argument, like most of Kent's arguments.
Yeah.
Now, Kent will say over and over again in all his debates, and probably tonight, that dogs always produce dogs and cows always produce cows, as if evolution says anything to the contrary. Kent has been corrected on this hundreds of times, literally hundreds, and yet he continues to say it. When Kent is talking about here is called the law of monophily, and it is part of the theory of evolution. So it's extremely weird that this forms Kent's most repeated argument against evolution. Kent, please try to understand this point tonight. I don't know where we'll go with it, but under evolution, we would expect that dogs always produce dogs. This is literally the law of monophily, in the same way that mammals always produce mammals. And actually, mammals are a really good example of this because they check all the boxes for Kent to consider them as a kind. Mammals always give birth to mammals. We never see any exceptions. Mammals always bring forth more mammals. Now, we get variations, as Kent's fond of talking about, like with different dog breeds. For mammals, we can get variations as far as dogs, cats, humans, rodents, and whales, and yet they're all still mammals. No matter how much they vary, you're always going to get a mammal. Sure, whales and mice cannot reproduce naturally, just like Chihuahuas and Great Danes can't. Eventually, the variations get so different that they can no longer interbreed, and that's exactly what evolution says. So, due to the law of monophily, you can never outgrow your ancestors. You are all in the same exact categories as they were. Now, this doesn't mean that new categories called clades, or as Kent calls them, kinds, cannot be created within the greater ancestral category. This is talking about...
Just real quick on that, I think that's a very crucial point that Kent will never accept. Like, you do not join or jump from one kind to another, but new kinds are created as the tree branches out. So it's not like you go from one kind to the other, but a new kind or something that is inherits all the traits from their ancestors but has new ones, then that spreads in itself. And that's what I try to explain in my debate. Like, a population of individuals gives birth to another population or two different populations, and then spread from there.
Yeah. The law of monophily, it only goes in one direction.
Yeah.
So, but when you try to explain this to Kent, like if he says dogs produce dogs, Kent's immediate response is going to be, okay, but going backwards, a dog came from an amoeba. It's like, yeah, but you just said that it's only going in a forward direction.
Yeah, and to that, I later on after my debate, I regretted that I did not phrase it that way, because a dog did not come from an amoeba. It came from another, in this case, wolf, and the wolf came from another mammal, and that mammal came from another type of creature. So jumping from the amoeba to the dog, that's why it's so confusing. And I think Kent is not dumb. I think he's just dishonest, and he knows it and he understands it, but he phrases it in such a way that people that don't understand it or don't want to go deeper into it, they will buy into his lie and just roll with it.
Yeah, he intentionally uses very vague words. He acts like he doesn't, but that's why when I debated him, I asked him, what do you mean by the word produce? Because he's conflating, when he says came from, he's conflating an animal giving birth with an animal having an ancestor millions of generations ago, as if it's the same thing when it's completely different. But when he says came from, it's very vague what he actually means, because came, like you could say I came from my parents, but I also came from my ancestors. Yeah. But I was only, my mom gave birth to me. My ancestor didn't give birth to me. And that's why I still don't understand when Kent said in my debate, he asked me about giving birth over millions of generations. And I said that you can't do that. And he called me stupid. And maybe I am stupid, because I still don't understand how that makes any sense, of giving birth over millions of generations if it's like one animal. I don't get that. So I don't know. I don't have enough PhDs.
kinds within kinds. Like the dog kind is nested within the mammal kind. For example, what does Kent think of mice and rats? They are two separate species that have more genetic differences between them than humans do with chimpanzees. And yet they're both rodents. But mice and rats are not mutually attracted to each other. They never mate in the wild. And even with artificial insemination, we cannot create a successful pregnancy or offspring. So are mice and rats two separately created kinds? We could just as easily say that mice and rats are rodents and that a rodent will always give birth to another rodent. So they're both the same rodent kind. But we could say the same thing about them both being mammals or vertebrates or eukaryotes. Kent loves to point to 4-year-olds to identify which animals are the same kind. So tell me this, Kent. If you show a 4-year-old a bear, a wolf, a lion, and a banana, do you think the 4-year-old can pick which one is unlike the others? Of course they can. Hence, the 4-year-old can easily understand what mammal kind is. Do you see how ridiculous these kinds of arguments are? They can all apply to mammals as a kind, which defeats your entire separate ancestry creation worldview.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't.
Regarding that, I would just add to that, and I was thinking about it. You could say in his example, I think it was a bear, a wolf, a dog, and a banana, and it is pretty obvious. But if you go and let's say add or put a bear, a dolphin, a whale, and a shark, and say which one's the different, the 4-year-old would say the bear, but no, it would be the shark because sharks are fish and the others are mammals. So what I would like to say with that is that if you stay at a 4-year-old level of reasoning, then yeah, evolution doesn't make sense. But if you outgrow that 4-year-old logic, then everything starts getting into place.
To my knowledge, Kent has no argument that can disqualify mammals as a kind while also including dogs as a kind. So Kent will need to address this. One way that he might bring up is that he'll say that dogs come from non-dogs at some point in the past, and that this somehow disproves evolution and violates the law of monophily, which is completely untrue. As we've already said, clades can be produced nested within larger clades, kinds within kinds. Kent agrees that a Chihuahua originally came from a non-Chihuahua, but that doesn't violate monophily, as the Chihuahua is still a dog like its ancestor. In the same exact way, a dog came from a non-dog, but that doesn't violate the law of monophily either, as both dogs and their non-dog ancestors are still the same kind of animals. They're carnivorous mammals. All the categories that applied to their ancestors also apply to dogs today. The dog kind is nested within the greater carnivoran kind. Kent will say that the variations of kinds are limited by physics. And that is totally true. You will never get a dog the size of Texas or a cow to jump over the moon because the laws of physics tell us that anatomically it's impossible. But there are no violations of physics involved in the evolutionary tree. This is simply a misdirection. Now, as a last line of evidence and defense, Kent will say that sequence homology doesn't prove common descent. It proves common design. And this is very easy to disprove. First of all, we can use common design to make predictions about what sequence homology should be if common design was a valid scientific theory to predict these things. And our predictions fail. For example, sharks and dolphins have very similar designs. So our common design prediction should be that they are closely genetically related, which they are not at all. Common design might make us believe that a walrus is genetically somewhere in between a manatee and an elephant. After all, their bodies closely resemble manatees, but they have tusks like elephants do. So surely if common design means genetic similarity, we should expect walruses to be somewhere between manatees and elephants. And yet the opposite is true. Manatees are the ones much more closely related to elephants than walruses are. So the strongest proof against common design and in favor of common ancestry is statistical modeling of genetics data. We can use the DNA of eukaryotic creatures that we are testing and measuring all over the planet to determine sequence homology between them and to create an evolutionary tree model that leads back to a single universal eukaryotic ancestor. And this model matches the data that we observe extremely precisely. Then we can try to fit that same data of genetics among currently living species onto trees of separate ancestry, as proposed by Kent's models of different created kinds, which kind of would resemble more of an orchard of descent rather than a single tree. And now here's the key. No matter how you construct those separate trees, using any kinds of groupings that you can come up with, you will never be able to get a closer, more better fitting model mathematically than one single tree with a universal common ancestor. And that is mathematical statistical proof of common ancestry. Thank you.
Okay. I have to charge my headphones because they died, but this is a great opening statement. I give him a lot of credit for doing this whole thing without slides. It was excellent. The only thing, and this is kind of a larger problem with these opening statements in general, not just with Grayson's, is that there's all these great questions that he posed to Kent. But after this, there's going to be 10 minutes of Kent's opening or whatever. And then I feel like by the time you get to the opening statement, a lot of debaters, they don't restate the questions from their opening, or Kent just ignores them. And a lot of times, like, happened in the Preston debate, those questions get lost. So my advice, I don't think anybody should debate Kent, but if people are going to, then my advice would be, go in with maybe 1 to 3 questions that you plan to ask Kent multiple times. If you're going to have them in the opening, expect to ask them again in the open discussion. And, be prepared for Kent to dodge them and have to re-ask them, because that's something that I wish more people would do.
Yeah, and I was thinking actually not having an opening statement at all, like go straight into the discussion, because that's what happens. And then Kent will be like, oh, one topic at a time, but in his turn he will bring like 15 things or 16 things and never go back to those. So I think the best approach is not having an opening statement, or just like 2 minutes, one idea, and then roll with it.
Yeah, and I've suggested this to Donnie before, but we'll see if it ever happens.
1-minute opening statement and opening argument.
Echoing on your end?
We're now going to move into a free-flowing dialogue portion, everybody's favorite part of the debate. Since Kent just ended with his opening statement, Grayson, why don't we hand it over to you to pick the first topic and ask the first question, and we'll kind of go from here. So, gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Sure. Let me just quickly answer some of the questions that Kent was posing. So clearly in my introduction, I made the case for universal common ancestry among all eukaryotes. So yes, obviously, I believe I share a common ancestor with plants and corn. Pretty obvious. Now, Kent said, how can a single cell become all of the different kinds of branches of life without breaking the law of monophily? And he asked me to name an example of an animal producing a different kind than itself, and not just.
Okay, we have a super chat from Big Bad Mama for $2. It says supporting AJ and his work. Well, thank you very much, Big Bad Mama, for your support. I appreciate it. So thank you.
Just a variety within its kind. And clearly, the very premise of this question shows that it's not exactly clicking what we're talking about here. The law of monophily states that that's never going to happen, right? All of evolution works without that ever having to happen. You never have an animal producing a fundamentally different kind, right? the varieties branch out and new kinds can be created within that nested clade, but you never outgrow what your ancestors were. I really want to get this point honed in our discussion. Is what I'm saying there, Kent? Like, what are you objecting to in that? You say I don't believe in the law of monophily, but it doesn't break the monophily. The law of monophily is not broken if one single eukaryotic cell differentiates into all the eukaryotes we see today. They're all still eukaryotes. The law is not broken.
Just because you're giving it the same name, eukaryote, makes no sense. This is the stuff they teach the kids, that a single-celled creature, again, we'll call it a bacteria for the sake of
we can't call it a bacteria.
Okay, what do you want?
I just love how no, that we cannot do that because that's a different thing.
And yeah, it wasn't a bacteria either. We're talking about the very first single-celled organisms.
I would even go
bacteria.
to say we don't even know what that was, or even there's some paper around that, but I don't think we even know exactly what that first unicellular organism was.
Okay, we have a super chat for $5 from Stacy C. It says supporting Big Bad Mama, supporting AJ. So thank you, Stacy, for the super chat.
What do you want? What was the original single-celled creature that evolved out of a rock?
Again, you're leading with the premise.
See, that's such a dishonest way of asking that question, because he's slipping that in at the end. Because this is what I liked about your debate, is that he's asking questions that are fundamentally malformed or dishonest. So you would tell him, like, and he would ask it and then say, well, yes or no, but you would answer not in the way that you're phrasing it, which I really liked. And that frustrated
Grayson, I think, is doing the same. Like he's like, no, that's not a bacteria. No, it did not evolve from a rock.
Yeah, it's like and he's always asking questions during his debates, which is fine, but it gets really annoying because one of the questions he's always asking is just, do you think common ancestry is true, over and over again, which is, I don't see the point in that. But it's a lot of times it's like you have to detangle all the things that are wrong or dishonest about his question and then try to answer it.
It's just his script. I mean, I think you mentioned it, like he's only trying to get a soundbite of you saying something that he would later laugh at or use against you. So that's his script, that's his move, and I like how Grayson did not fall into that.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, we have a super chat from Quagma TV. It says, here's $5. Go buy a Nintendo or a Star Wars. I'm not sure what a Star Wars is, but, and then we have another one. I don't know how to pronounce this username, but this person is in all of my live streams, so thank you for $5. It says supporting Stacy, supporting Big Bad Mama, supporting AJ.
Here, the reason I say you can't say bacteria is because bacteria do horizontal gene transfer, and horizontal gene transfer that does break the law of monophily. That is a way that bacteria and archaea can break the law of monophily, and we observe that today happening in labs. That's observable, testable science. The law of monophily can be broken by horizontal gene transfer, and that's why we would start with a eukaryotic cell, because eukaryotic cells are not capable of horizontal gene transfer, and so the law of monophily is followed for all of eukaryotes and their descendants.
So does this drawing, taken from a typical textbook, show a single-celled creature at the origin of life down here? Mm-hmm. You don't want to call it a bacteria. It does have bacteria written on here, though. You can see the fine print. Okay. This single-celled creature turned into a shark, mm-hmm, and also a fern.
I think you're on mute.
For 50, check Karuna from Kicker White Lion. It says, through genetic analyses, we have a good idea of what the genes of Luca, the last universal common ancestor, looked like. It may not have even been alive. And then from Regios, for $10, it says, supporting UDEF, supporting Stacy, supporting Big Bad Mama, supporting AJ. So thank you, Regios. Thank you
That's
for
a ring of
everybody.
support. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. My viewers are very generous. So thank you to everybody who is sending super chats. I really appreciate the support.
And a starfish and an octopus.
Yes.
And Grayson, do you believe you came from a single-celled eukaryote billions of years, or millions, hundreds of trillions of years ago, or whatever it is? Give you all
Well,
the
I
time.
mean, I
See that, like, what does he mean by came from? That's what is not clear to me.
Yeah,
I
and
think
using
that's
that
essential.
graph is like so dishonest. Like that's such a bad graph to use.
Right. That's more of like a poster you would have like in a classroom, but this is not what charts in a scientific paper or an accurate evolutionary chart would look like. Each one of these animal groups or species would be split into hundreds of different variables for each one. So having these lines, like, you have to imagine there being tons of degrees of separation between all of the individual organisms you see on there. But he just thinks one transforms into the other, and that they all came from one individual common single-celled ancestor, like it was one organism that changed into all these other things. But it's just such a misunderstanding.
Yeah, and it's kind of like what I said during my debate, and I don't know if I could quickly share my screen to that point. Just 1 second. Let's see. Okay, I don't know how to do this. I shouldn't. Okay. Oh shoot. Sorry, I'm new to this.
That's okay. We have another super chat from Jamie for 2 British pounds. So thank you, Jamie. There's no message though. Yeah, if you share it, I should be able to
No.
add to the screen.
I don't think I can. Something's happening. But I mean, it's just the point
came
of
from a
if you
single-celled
use
eukaryote.
Sorry. Go ahead.
that cartoon, it's easy to say it's not true. I brought it up, like, if you use a cartoon, that's what I wanted to share, like a cartoon of Noah's Ark that has a monkey being bigger than an elephant, then you would be like, yeah, it's not possible. Yeah, but because that's not an accurate representation of the idea. It's just a cartoon.
Yeah.
Long, much more recently than that, in my mother's womb. So,
And you think that happened by chance?
no.
Okay. You understand how complex that process is?
Where we're getting at with this is that it does not break the law of monophily for a single eukaryotic cell ancestor to differentiate and evolve into plants and sharks and octopi and all of these different things. That does not break the law of monophily, because they're all still fundamentally the same kind that ancestor was. They're all eukaryotes.
So everything made out of iron, airplanes, battleships, tanks, cars, silverware. That's so not technically, it's not silver anymore. Ironware had a common ancestor. If they could reproduce, adding reproduction makes it much more complicated.
See, and there's the key. There is that they can't reproduce. So
Yeah. So if it's okay to use analogies, but if you have an analogy, the root word it comes from is analogous. So you have to have analog. You have to have an analog for reproduction in your analogy, or else it's an incomplete analogy. And while I can understand what he's saying here about everything being made of iron, it's actually not terrible, because we're talking about things being made of the same type of cells, and this is the same type of metal. But if you're talking about common ancestry or ancestors and things that are able to be related, if you don't have an analog for reproduction, then the analogy is pretty much worthless. But Kent's response is just, oh, well, adding reproduction makes it more complicated for you. It's like, well, this is your analogy, Kent. You can't turn it back around on the other person just because you made a bad simile, you know?
Yeah, and something that I think Kent does not grasp is that analogies are not the same thing. Things that are similar, that they share some things that are, or share some things in common, but are not the same things. So you cannot just equate the two of them and say it's the same thing. Talking about tools made with iron and living things, it's not the same thing.
Yeah. And Jamie's message, it says, sorry, meant to give my admiration to AJ for continuing to listen to that voice. Well, I'm pretty much used to it at this point, so I have Hovind PTSD.
And you have a great impression of him.
Thank you.
You can never have an airplane. Like, who are the parents of an airplane? Does it have a mommy and a daddy airplane? No. So that's why the analogy doesn't work. These things cannot be compared in the way you're trying to.
Did the airplane have a designer?
Yes.
You believe that?
Yeah.
Does a protozoa have a designer?
Who knows? I personally don't think so.
Do you understand a protozoa is about a quadrillion times more complex than an airplane?
Sure, but
how do you quantify that?
Yeah.
Like, how did you figure that out? Like, how are we defining complexity? Because if you talk about the organelles or the different systems in either one, there's a lot, but I don't really see how one is more complex than the other, because if you go down to the fundamental atomic level, everything is made of atoms and the same fundamental particles, and you can go down further and it's quarks. So really everything is made of the same fundamental particles. It's just different configurations.
Yeah. And something that I always think is he or Kent always says that a single human cell is more complicated than the space shuttle, but the space shuttle would not be possible without human cells. So then the space shuttle has that complexity added to its own complexity. I don't know if that makes sense, but again, you're comparing two completely different things.
Yeah. And basically everything that's on Earth is covered in bacteria. It's covered in these organisms. So are those organisms a part of the space shuttle? I mean, they're not part of its design, but does that add to the complexity? I mean, that's why it's not clear. It's like when creationists use the word information. How are you quantifying complexity? How are you quantifying information? It's just a word they use. It helps
to add to the confusion.
Yeah, is one bacteria more complex than the other bacteria, and is a multi-celled organism more complex than a single-celled one? I mean, I think Kent would say no, because he seems to think that single-celled organisms are the most complex thing in the universe. But I don't know. It's just it's an argument that he intentionally designs it so it can't be refuted, basically.
I don't think that complexity is like, I mean, that's just like an argument from, incredulity, basically saying it's so complex, it has to be designed. I don't think that logically follows.
The argument from incredulity is a very legitimate one. Okay. This ink
I just think that's hilarious.
pen had a designer. It is not possible for this to not have a designer. I have no idea who it was, where it was, and I don't care at all. It works. That's what I want to write with, okay? But it had a designer. It boggles the mind that you can believe an airplane had to have a designer.
There are pigments in nature that are not designed. Kent would say that everything in nature is designed, but they're not designed. And there are probably, you could pick up a berry off of a plant, and you could potentially write something with it using the juice as ink. Well, that wasn't designed, but it still functions as a pen. See what I'm saying? And that pen is designed, but it's not very complex, is it? It's very simple. There are complex pens, but the complexity, I would like him to explain how that proves it was designed and how you can transfer that over to nature, because there are things in nature that form spontaneously, like snowflakes. This is what Professor Dave argued in his debate with Kent. That doesn't mean that everything forms spontaneously.
Yeah, and then you would have to prove that designer. You cannot just say it is a proof of a designer. Okay, it can be a proof of common design as well, but then you would have to prove that there is a designer. If you just say it, it's just like words that come out of your mind with no sense.
But a protozoa did not, when it's quadrillions of times more complex than an airplane.
Well, let's look at it this way, right? I, as an organism, am way more complex than an airplane. But I did not have a designer. I formed from my parents, and the whole process happened naturally without any kind of intervention. And for that reason, I mean, like the whole reason is that you can't make the analogy because the pen doesn't reproduce. It has no mommy or daddy pen. Okay. There is no relation. There is no ancestry when you're talking about a pen. So it can't be compared.
When your mother and father's genetic material got together and formed the embryo that was going to turn into you, okay?
He's talking about shaman. Shaman.
Was that following a code of any kind? Is there a DNA code that tells that first cell how to make an arm or a leg or a heart or a brain? Or
I have my own DNA.
You what now?
I have my own set of DNA, yes.
And is that a pretty complex code, the DNA code you have?
Yes.
More complex than, say, the Library of Congress all put together?
Probably.
And you think it happened by billions of years of nobody designing that code?
Complex things can result from simple systems that are repeated over very long time periods. Yeah. It's like the formation of crystals. It's a simple process, but it's repeated over a really long time, and you can get incredibly intricate crystalline structures that are the size of buildings underground. It just takes a really long time for them to form. It's a similar thing with snowflakes. They form based on chaotic conditions in the atmosphere. And there are all these different variables that can cause different designs in the snowflake that look designed. They absolutely look designed, and they have symmetry. But their creation is totally chaotic and random. That's why we can't predict what the weather is going to be with very much accuracy. And yet we can know all of the orbits of planets that are very far away from us, because those systems are a lot less chaotic than the atmosphere of Earth. So these things might look designed, but that doesn't necessarily prove that it is designed. And it's like you said, Kant's argument would really only get him to a deistic God. He still has the hurdle of proving that it's the God of the Bible, which he has specifically said he has no intention of doing. And he seems to think he has no burden of proof because, I'm not trying to get it taught in public schools. But we went over that in my debate, and he basically admitted that he is. So that means, according to his logic, that he does have that burden of proof. But I think he recognizes that he doesn't have good arguments for the Bible, or that the designer is his God.
And even if he was trying to get creation taught, that's not how burden of proof works. I mean, scientists have been working on this, and they have had their burden of proof, and they have proved their ideas and their concepts way before Kant even started, debating this stuff. So he brings the argument that those ideas and that those things are wrong. So he has the burden of proof of proving those arguments wrong, right? So he would need to bring some more arguments and evidence and stuff that would prove his claim of those claims being wrong.
Yeah. And it's like he likes to give the court of law argument, but any lawyer would tell you that if you're making a positive claim, if you've got an accusation, then you do have the burden of proof to provide evidence. If you're accusing somebody of a crime, then you're supposed to bring the evidence, and the other side defends that person's innocence because he's
Unless you're in
presumed
Mexico.
innocent.
Unless you're in Mexico. In Mexico, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
And it sucks.
Yeah, I don't see why not.
I know you don't see why not. Everybody else with a common sense would say that's insane.
That's an argument for majority opinion, which Kent, I only bring that up because Kent is always the one who says that that's a fallacy.
Yeah.
Even though I think when it comes to a scientific consensus, that's not an argument from majority opinion, because that's an argument from people who are experts in the relative scientific field.
Yeah, and it comes down to the nature of this discussion. Something that I have been thinking lately is this is entertainment. This is not a scientific discussion or whatever, because neither of the debaters are scientists in the proper way. And something that I always think people get cut off with or get cut on with Kant is saying you don't have a PhD. Even if he does, and even granting him he has those 4 PhDs, they're in Christian education. So he's an expert in Christian education, not biology, not geology, not astrology, or astrology, astronomy. Yeah, sorry. So he can be trusted in Christian education. When he talks about how to indoctrinate or how to educate Christians, then he's an authority. But if you talk to a biologist or any of other science areas, then you go to those experts. And even until Kent has a PhD in biology, then he will be an authority to talk about that. If not, then keep talking about Christian education.
Yeah. Or an authority if you want to know about structuring your cash.
To say an ink pen happened by chance is insane. To say a human being happened by chance over trillions, quadrillions, quintillions of years is insane.
Right. I'm not saying it happened by chance, though. You just asked, does this thing happen without a designer? That's a false dichotomy between something happening without a designer and something happening just by chance. I don't believe it happened just by chance.
This break it back to breaking the law of monophily.
Yes.
The protozoa in this chart for children in the textbooks produced all the reptiles, all the birds, the humans, the lobsters, the spiders. Everything came from a protozoa.
Yeah.
But that did not break the law of monophily?
Absolutely not.
Because they're all eukaryotes.
Yeah, because they're all still the same type as that eukaryotic single cell ancestor was. What you can happen, this was my point in my opening, right? You can have a kind, and then you can have kinds created and nested within that greater kind. I mean, the example is a Chihuahua is a new kind that was created within the dog kind. Now, Chihuahuas will always produce Chihuahuas. They are part of this Chihuahua kind, but they are still dogs like their ancestors. Does this analogy make more sense to you?
It made sense from the beginning, but is a Chihuahua then a protozoa?
Obviously, a Chihuahua is not a protozoa, but both the Chihuahua and the protozoa, to use your terminology, well, I don't know if I would use protozoa, but the Chihuahua and the single-celled eukaryotic ancestor from which it evolved are both eukaryotes. That's the similarity.
Then why do we have biology and classification at all? Everything's the same kind. Everything on this page is the same kind. There's no way to tell the difference between any of them.
Because
nobody in the world can tell the difference between a fish and a bird.
My whole point is that you can break down kinds into kinds within those kinds. So taxonomy does exactly this. It gets more and more specific until you get to individual kinds that can interbreed with each other and are the same species or the same subspecies. You continually break it down, but it's all a nested hierarchy, kinds within kinds.
So can the birds bring forth anything other than birds? They're now stuck in their clade. But before that, the protozoa could turn to a bird. But
See, this is exactly what he does. No, because the law works, and it's what I talked about in my debate. It's a law about animals giving birth, producing their offspring.
The most immediate thing, not through a lot of generations.
Yeah.
now the bird can't go back. Is that right?
Yeah, none of these things go back, right? I mean, they continue to produce, like a chihuahua continues to produce a chihuahua. A sparrow continues to produce a sparrow. You never get a sparrow that's giving birth to a penguin, but they're both birds. Birds always bring forth birds. Sparrows always bring forth sparrows. But a sparrow is never going to give birth to anything that was behind it in the evolutionary tree. That's not how it works. Once the kind is created, that becomes a new monophyletic branch.
Okay. All humans in all of human recorded history.
I like it when Kent is just blatantly proven wrong about something, and he's just like, okay,
Just moves on.
just ignores it. That's when you know you've scored a good point against him, because
It's either that or he starts saying, I don't understand what he's saying, or he's cutting off, or maybe I'm old.
well, that is a symptom of people who have strokes, is that they have trouble understanding other people.
Yeah,
So,
but I think that's his strategy. Whenever he doesn't know what to answer, he's like, I cannot hear you.
yeah, and for one thing, it's like, well, maybe you should be wearing headphones. But it's always when I can understand the other person perfectly watching the debate, and I'm like, how can you not hear what they said? But he did it when you were debating him, because there was a section of your debate that I really liked where he brought up and I'm surprised he hasn't brought it up already. Where did the layers come from? Did they come from outer space? And you explained it to him in a way that was so clear. But he said, you asked him a question that was really good, and he was like, "Oh, I don't understand that question." But and I was like, "Come on, Kent." That was annoying.
It's just his dishonesty.
All they've ever observed is not what you're saying. We don't see anything coming into creating a new clade. We see dogs produce dogs and cows produce cows.
Yeah, this is just a fundamentally flawed thing, is that you have to observe something for it to be science. And I wish Kent would give this up, but we know that he won't.
No.
Protozoa produce protozoa. How many protozoa? How many have been raised in the laboratory? Protozoa. They've never gotten one to turn to a non-protozoa, but your chart shows it turning
wolves, as humans in human history, we've seen wolves differentiate into all the dog breeds. Those are new kinds. You have a Chihuahua always produces a Chihuahua. That fits your biblical definition of a kind, does it not?
Well, no, they're going to bring forth after their kind. I just got my slides messed up here.
Yeah, and if you see Kent frantically scrolling through his slides, that's another good sign that you're winning the debate.
Definitely.
Because he knows he can't answer that question, because the answer is yes. It does match his definition of a kind, and his definition has no consistency. And when you point out the inconsistencies of it, he does stuff like this.
Dogs always produce the dog kind. The Chihuahua, the Great Dane, and the wolf probably had a common ancestor. They can certainly interbreed. Coyotes, wolves, and dogs can all interbreed. They don't like to. They don't normally do it, but they can. But the Chihuahua and the protozoa cannot.
So what kind are they? Are they the coyote kind, the wolf kind, or the dog kind?
And if a wolf changed into a dog, then that proves that those changes are possible. And something that I wanted to ask him is, how do you differentiate, or how do you make the difference between a dog and a wolf? Why don't you call them the same thing? Because there are slight and very minor differences that make you go, yeah, it's a wolf or it's a dog. So those are the small steps that are needed to go all the way from a single cell organism to humans and whatever we see now. That's the diversity that. And I wanted to ask him, what mechanisms make the wolf go to a dog? And if I thought of that later on after the debate was over, but that would have been the argument that won me the debate. That he would be like, well, or the only reasonable answer would be mutation, genetic drift, and all that, which are the evolutionary mechanisms.
I do think you won your debate with him, if that wasn't clear, but just saying.
I don't think there's winners or losers in this debate. Like, his side will always say he won. The other, the evolution side will always say the evolution side won. So,
well, I would say that I have seen Kent win some debates, because some people are better than others, and that's why I think that this debate was notable because Grayson did his whole debate without any slides.
yeah.
But you can see Kent is totally dependent on his slides. And it's something he does a lot lately, is that he is uncomfortable without his slides. So he'll be frantically scrolling.
And he always is like, I give a thorough explanation in my video number, blah, blah. Well, explain it now. I don't want to go and check your video. Explain it now during the debate, because that's what we are here for.
Yeah. And one of the most annoying things is when he is presented with an argument that he wasn't expecting or doesn't have slides for, he'll be like, oh, well, we'll do a debate about that next time. It's like, no, this is another evidence for evolution that's under the umbrella topic of evidence for evolution. So you should be expected to respond to it now. That's just a cop-out to say that.
And if he doesn't have an argument to counter that, then that's 1 point for the evolution side. And if we keep a score, then they're winning.
Okay, we have a super chat from Coral Reef for $4.99. It said, wouldn't the simplicity versus complexity argument hurt Kent's watchmaker talking point? Maybe he would try jerrying and squirming out or outright ignoring it. Yeah, I think so, because well, maybe this person can explain more in the comments, but I'm sure that he would try to ignore any arguments against his arguments. Any time that you point out that his arguments are fallacious, or that he has double standards, or that anytime that you ask him direct questions that he really can't answer, he will avoid them. Like I mentioned earlier, when you asked him a really good question, I forget what it was, but you did a really good job explaining to him how obviously when they're dating layers, you said that they're dating the configuration, not the atoms in the layers. But he just basically did what this person is saying and sort of ignored it and changed the topic to something else, or obfuscated.
The Chihuahua and the sparrow cannot. So God said, bring forth after their kind. Do you know an example where this didn't happen? God said they'd bring forth after their kind. He said it a bunch of times. Maybe even you might get it. Do they always bring forth?
That's just rude.
Yeah.
Forth after their kind?
Not with horizontal gene transfer, as we've already demonstrated. So, but the main point I want to get across is what disqualifies chihuahuas or mammals as fitting this definition of kind, but makes dogs fit that definition of kind.
Okay. Man has decided to put our classification onto these animals. Carolus lineus, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. I don't think they care. You turn all the animals in the world loose out into the pasture, they will seek out their own kind. Our cows show no interest whatsoever in the sheep or the pine trees or the oak trees or the grass.
So what about the animals that do? Like, for instance, dolphins are known to try to have sex with humans whenever they see them. This is a known phenomenon. There are several types of toads that will try to have sex with just about anything. So does that mean that a dolphin and a human are the same kind if dolphins are attracted to humans and try to have sex with them?
Maybe they're deprived and horny. I don't know why the dolphin would do such a thing.
See, this is such a great argument. This is exactly what I'm talking about, is taking Kent's arguments and showing how his own arguments, and this was a great thing that he thought of in the moment, how if you apply his arguments across the board, there are going to be examples where it doesn't apply and it doesn't make sense. And he had no explanation for that, but he's going to keep making that same argument. I've seen him do it in recent videos, this same argument. But Grayson just showed that it doesn't make sense. And there are plenty of animals that won't go after the females, like bonobos, or that will, like he said, frogs that will mate with other animals. There are a lot of animals that are really stupid or blind. They're animals that can't see very well.
Or they don't even, I mean, that would not count as animals, but organisms that don't even have sex.
Right. Animals, exactly. Animals that don't have sex, or that have like more than just male female genders, like fungi, or that reproduce in lots of different ways. He's got such a narrow focus, because like Aaron Ross says, Kent's perception has no depth to it. He only wants to talk about animals that reproduce by sexual reproduction. But like his kind definition, how do you apply that to like slime molds or fungi or even plants, because they don't reproduce sexually?
Yeah.
Okay, Coral Reef said, jerry rig, I mean, with the DNA code, there's areas that are redundant. With everything man-made, we aim for simplicity. Yeah, this is an argument that I think has been made to Kent before, that, the hallmark of design is usually simplicity. If you design something like, I don't know, like a toaster, you're not going to design it to be complex and hard to use. You're going to design it so that it's easy to use, so that anybody can use it. Also, because it's dangerous, it could potentially burn or electrocute somebody. So you want to design it in a way that's simple to use, so there's not going to be user error.
Yeah, and there's something that I found funny on the debate, the latest debate with Preston, that I have heard Kent mention before. Like, a poor design is not a proof of no design, and he shows like a bunch of toilets and unusable bathrooms, and he was like, they were designed by a stupid man, but they were designed. Okay, so you're saying God is stupid, and because I don't get that.
Yeah, and if poor design it doesn't mean there's no designer, then complex design doesn't mean there's any designer.
Exactly.
Okay. But the humans, well, can't even say that anymore. Males always seek out the females. That's changing now. But
any chance to get a dig at the LGBT people, Kent will take it.
And I think it's just a boomer thing. Like, making those gay jokes and all that is so boomer.
Yeah. Also, bisexual people exist, Kent.
And asexual people exist.
Yeah.
Okay. God said they would bring forth after their kind. I've never seen an exception to that. And
something I've thought about is that I would like to have my own laugh track during a debate if I debated Kent, where I can make jokes and I can play the laugh track, because Kent shouldn't be the only one that gets to have one,
Well, you can always get a Matt Powell to
your
jokes.
you're trying to vary the word kind to mean if it's eukaryotes. That's the way the cell structure is built. That has nothing to do with if it's the same kind. If the cell structure has a membrane enclosing the DNA code, which is unbelievably complex, so what? That's a great design that works. How the cells split and reproduce. Got stuff on it right here.
Saying, it's a great design that works. Well, there are lots of designs by that same argument that aren't very good. Like, human beings walk upright and have a lot of back problems because of that. The esophagus and the windpipe being the same tube has caused a lot of humans to die. and by choking. You know, there are tons of examples of design that don't seem like great designs that work because they cause the organism to die. That's the worst design you can get, basically, you know. But he's still going to say that bad design doesn't disprove a designer, but he's still going to make the opposite argument, you know.
Yeah, and if he just wants to keep saying that and saying that God is a bad designer, that he's not as smart, then, well, he's welcome to it.
Where was it? Oh, here we go. Okay.
Here we
The
go.
chromosomes are incredibly complex, and they're in a nucleus that's bound in a membrane. This is a fabulous design. I look at it and say, wow, that DNA code of one cell in your body, and you probably got 100 trillion cells in your body. Each one of those contains the DNA code, and the way it multiplies and makes copies of itself is impossible for this to have happened by chance.
Why? It doesn't do a very good job of making copies of itself. That's why we have mutations.
Yeah, and the fact that it's not created by a god does not mean that it was just by chance. Mutations are random and by chance, but then natural selection acts on them. It's not chance.
Yeah, and this is something I always think about when I watch Mark Reed, not his last debate, but the debate before that with Kent, where he told Kent over and over again that evolution isn't chance, it's a deterministic process where the mutations that happen, you could say they happen by chance, but they're selected for in a process that's deterministic and is logical.
Yeah.
But he'll never stop saying, "Oh, you believe it happened by chance." And I asked
from a
Kent,
rock.
yeah, in my debate, like, do you think happened by chance just mean it wasn't designed by God? And I don't think he really answered my question. Of course not.
It's just not possible. The only alternative is, logical alternative, somebody designed it. And you guys don't want that. You're going to jump through all the hoops you can to avoid the accountability.
We've got Kent in 3 frames a second.
That designer. Good luck, Judgment Day on that one.
Again, I'd like to just say that this is a false dichotomy, that either it happened fully by chance or it was designed. This is not a dichotomy. It can happen in a guided naturalistic means, like natural selection is not chance. It doesn't have to be, oh, it's all chance or it's designed. And saying that, well, okay, yeah, they're all eukaryotes because a eukaryotic cell is the only way to do it. That's the best design for multicellular creatures. I don't know. I mean, I don't think that it holds much weight, because you can take the same argument for eukaryotes and you can apply it to mammals, right? You can say mammals are a kind. They fit all the checklist boxes for the biblical definition of a kind. Explain to me why mammals are not a kind.
Well, the Bible's very clear. If they can bring forth, they're the same kind. All the mammals cannot bring forth. The beavers cannot bring forth with the buffalo or the humans, okay? They are
neither
all
can all
mammals.
the dogs.
Well, or dog. Well, we have decided to put a classification system on them. I decide in our shop to put all the wrenches in one spot, the screwdriver somewhere else, and the
I'm God.
hammer
And
somewhere else.
Sorry. That's something that I would like to see someone press on, like saying, and I think Mark brought that up, like there's reasons behind that. It's not just that someone decided to call those mammals or decided to call them dogs or whales. There's a reasoning behind that, and there's a process to do that. It's not just something that someone came up with.
They don't care what we call them or where we put them. We're putting this classification on them. So just because some man has decided to classify the beaver and the deer as the same kind, a mammal, so I think can they bring forth? No. Well, then they're not the same kind.
But there are animals like squirrels and lizards who are ring species who can't bring forth anymore, but Kent will still say they're the same kind. It's a lizard or a squirrel. So that's why I say that the definition doesn't have consistency.
Yeah.
Both have hair on the outside. They both breathe air. They both have lungs. They both give live birth. So there's some similarities, but that again could go back to, wow, the same guy designed it. Works pretty good.
Okay, are you and I the same kind?
I wonder.
Yeah, I mean, because we cannot bring forth, right?
Not even going to try.
Right, exactly. So then by your definition, what makes us the same kind?
Well, we are both human. I think are two male deer the same kind? Yeah, they're both deer. Just because they can't have babies, obviously.
It's a really good question, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, I think and Ken's kind of falling for it here because obviously the answer is that the species can bring forth. It doesn't matter about the individuals, but he doesn't even realize that,
They can with the female. Either one of them could.
So then
You
how
and
do
I,
you
either
know
one of us
they're the same kind? If they can't bring forth together, then what is your criteria for saying that they're the same kind?
Well, I think to anybody observing here, you're obviously straining at a gnat and swallowing a camel.
What does
It's a
that even
debate.
mean?
It's a debate. Like, this is a really good question and one I've never even really thought of. But it's a saying from the Bible. It basically just means you're focusing on something that's not important. But like, Ken doesn't want to answer it because it's a hard question.
Yeah.
And
would
the
just
obvious
debate.
answer should be that they have the same DNA. But if he answers that, then I think Grayson's next question will be, well, then why don't you think the DNA similarities between different species prove they're related?
Humans, I think, are the same kind and came from a common ancestor called a human.
So animals that came from the same ancestor are the same kind? Interesting.
All the dogs are the same kind and came from a common ancestor called a dog.
No, a wolf.
Yeah. a wolf.
Well, all the
cows have a common
chihuahuas are the
ancestor.
same kind and came from an ancestor called a chihuahua, right?
No, I think the Chihuahua is a great mistake for anybody to do that to the dog. Keep selecting the smaller and smaller one until you get the dumbest dog on the world.
But
Next
you
to the
see
pug,
how
my
I
wife's dog.
can just change the words in your argument to show why your argument does not apply here, right? I mean,
Okay.
if I just use chihuahuas, how is that not a kind? Or how is mammals not a kind? I don't think that you're answering
Well,
this.
let's take the mammal example. Is a Chihuahua and a giraffe the same species?
No.
Okay. Are they both mammals?
Yes.
Well, why aren't they the same species then?
Because mammals is not a species. Mammals is a kind.
It's a higher classification.
Yes.
We have decided to classify them by kingdom: animal kingdom, plant kingdom, protista. We divided life forms up into 3 different kingdoms. The life forms don't care. And then within the kingdom, we gave it.
Yeah, mammals are a group. They're not a species.
A phylum. Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. I don't think the animals care at all. I've decided to put my hammers, my screwdrivers, and my wrenches all in one building called the shop. Okay? The tools don't care where we put them. We can classify them any way we want. It's obvious to anybody observing that mice, or giraffes, and beavers are both mammals. We decided to call it. We said if it's got hair, it bears live young, and it breathes air, it's in the mammal category. That doesn't have anything to do with the kind. They're different species. They're different genus. I don't know if they're different family or how far it goes before the difference splits, before man has decided to classify them together, both in the mammal category, but you're not getting it. There are no examples of any animal or plant ever producing something that anybody with a brain cell would think is a different kind. Do the ladybugs always produce ladybugs? Yeah.
Why do you think that evolution would require that? I mean, isn't that just a straw man? I mean, no one is claiming that you're going to have an animal giving birth to a different kind of animal.
Look at the chart the kids are, look at the stuff they're taught.
See, but the charts aren't talking about giving birth.
Yeah.
It's fundamental conflation here.
And something that I would always want someone to press on with Kant is like, he's like, well, I don't know, that would be a great field of study. Okay, go then and study that, and you'll find out the reasons, and you'll be an evolutionary biologist. I think you brought it up on my debates review, like saying, yeah, there's people that has done that analysis, and they are evolutionary biologists.
Yeah. I think we're gonna skip ahead a little bit to some questions. What do you think?
Yeah, that's great. I think we were close to the end of the discussion, right?
I think there's a little bit to go, but I don't want to take up too much of your time, so we'll just watch some of the Q&A and then probably wrap the video up.
Okay.
Since you believe the prokaryote evolved into a eukaryote, doesn't this violate the law of monophily? The eukaryote outgrew its clade. Go ahead.
Right. So in the evolution of eukaryotes, you have several processes at work, and we touched on some tonight, that do not obey the law of monophily. So among prokaryotes, they do not obey the law of monophily because they have horizontal gene transfer. This process violates the law of monophily. So prokaryotes, all day, you can observe it today in a lab, the breaking of the law of monophily among prokaryotes because of horizontal gene transfer. And now there's another process that was involved in the creation of eukaryotes that also violates the law of monophily, called endosymbiosis, where a cell will absorb a different kind of organism and kind of co-op it for its own organism system. So there are those two processes alone in the evolution of the eukaryote that do break the law of monophily. Kent, if you'd like to respond.
Okay, thank you, Grayson. Kent, the floor is yours.
A legitimate question and a fair answer that he gave. He believes that, but nothing else is allowed to break that law. So actually, it's not a law if something can break it. Okay, so it's a suggestion. So the prokaryote evolved into a eukaryote, and it does violate the law of monophily. And he says they got an answer for that. That's fine. I accept his answer. I think he's wrong, but we've never observed this. Nobody's ever observed a prokaryote turn into a eukaryote, have they?
Grayson, you get the last word if you want to answer it, and then whoever the question is for here, we make sure gets the last word. So Grayson, go ahead.
No, we haven't observed that directly. I mean, that's one of probably one of the bigger mysteries in terms of like what the process looks like, but it's a process that is currently being worked out. We don't have all the answers currently. We have seen single-celled organisms turn into multi-cell organisms, but we haven't observed prokaryotes to eukaryotes. But like I said, all of these things that violate monophily, we can observe today in today's prokaryotes.
Yeah, and we mentioned this earlier, but this is, again, it's talking about animals that reproduce sexually, which bacteria don't do.
And it's a clear sign that he does not understand it when he's like, yeah, bacteria get birth and get married and have kids. They don't marry or have kids. That shows he doesn't. I think he understands it, but he purposefully misrepresents it.
Yeah, he's got such an oversimplified boomer view. Like, this is the only way that any organism can live, is that they have to grow up and go to church and get married and have kids. Like, he just can't have any perception that's not related to his own life. It's really weird.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Moving on. This one is now for you, Kent. We've got a healthy amount of questions for the both of you. So this one comes in from Creationist Crybaby. Question for Kent. Cars can't reproduce. Why do you compare them to living organisms?
Adding the ability to reproduce increases the complexity by trillions of times. I agree. Cars can't reproduce. Cars can't make themselves. So for a human, which is capable of reproducing, as well as being complex, I mean, the human is really complex. And you want to add the ability to reproduce on top of that, in spite of the incredible complexity of all the different systems of our body.
How would you add reproduction to a car, though?
That would be funny to see a car penis.
It's like a gas pump. No, you're not adding reproduction though, because we're talking about organisms that do reproduce. And again, not all living organisms do that. So it's just another reason. I think that would be a good question. Is or a follow-up question would be, well, there are animals that don't reproduce. Or there are organisms that don't.
Yeah.
But they're still related to everything else that's a living organism, even though they don't reproduce.
Just one single square inch of your skin is more complex than New York City or Dallas, Texas. 1 square inch. And so you want to add the ability to reproduce onto there, you've made the problem worse. I'm trying to give a simple analogy. If cars can't make themselves, you think if they could reproduce, they could make themselves? Is that what you're trying to say, crybaby? By the way, I got what you need, crybaby, right here. Your pacifier. Come on. You can be on the program next. More time. That cures it, doesn't it? Go ahead.
I just want to say that Kent says that atheists and evolutionists need a pacifier because if you take away time, that they're going to start crying. But I've seen a lot of Kent's videos where he's crying. I've never made a video on YouTube where I was crying, but Kent has made many. So maybe he's the one who needs the pacifier. Maybe that's why he has it.
And his pacifier would be the Bible. Whenever
Yeah.
he doesn't know what to do or what the Bible, he is the creationist baby. I think that's where that name comes from.
Yeah, definitely.
Appreciate it, Kat. Thank you so much. Grayson, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I pointed this out earlier in the debate. The entire process of evolution, it relies on like inheritance with descent with modification. If there's no descent, if there's no replication, reproduction, you're not going to get evolution. The entire evolutionary process relies upon reproduction. So it doesn't make any sense to try to make an analogy to something that can't reproduce. The analogy fails right there. It is an invalid analogy to make. So yeah, cars cannot have parents. There are no relations among cars.
Okay, so wow, it's been almost an hour and a half. It's gone by really fast, but I don't want to take up too much of your time, Horazio, but I'm glad. Thank you for reaching out to me for wanting to do another one of these reviews. I think I would suggest anybody who hasn't seen the Grayson debate, watch the rest of it, because the rest of the open discussion is really good. But yeah, any final thoughts?
Well, now just thank you for having me, AJ. I've been wanting to do this for a long time, but sometimes I just forget. I get too caught up in work, and then whenever I leave, I just don't feel like logging into YouTube and enduring Kent Hovind. But
Yeah,
I just want to end saying, as I mentioned earlier, this is just entertainment, and this is not where you come to get your information or to define your worldview. What I have done is, 1 year ago, I didn't even know these debates existed. I didn't even think that there were people doubting evolution, to be honest. I just found out, and I got caught up in this rabbit hole. And as I told in my debate, I have learned a lot from Kent Hovind, but not from what he says, but by fact checking what he says and learning what the actual things are. So I would encourage anyone, and I think if someone's watching this video, they would already be critical enough to know that it's just bullshit, but try to spread that message, that don't just swallow whatever Kent or any other person says. You should always go and fact check everything.
yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Stacy.
We have a super chat from Anternium Valentium for £5. It says, some of the simulations I use in chemistry use tenets from evolution to iterally iteratively generate more accurate models, values, etc. Predictions equal validity. Well, thank you. And thank you to all the people who sent super chats. And, you know, thank you to everybody watching the stream. I think we're going to wrap it up here, but I'm really glad to have you on, Horazio. And if you want to do a video like this again, you know, I'd be happy to have you on. So,
well, thank you,
you
and
know.
I would be glad to do that. And thanks for everyone for watching. And I think it's been great. It was just fun.
Yeah, and I'll just see you guys in the next video. There was a poll I posted, and the video was for the Whack and Atheist stream. Next time is going to be the Professor Dave part 2, because Kent has now done 3 videos on Professor Dave. The second one he did was really boring, so I'm going to be doing then my next stream is going to be on his last video about Professor Dave, because it actually gets into some of the other stuff he said. Because the second stream he did, it was literally just the like, oh, the, you know, where he does a thing where there's this many kinds of sharks and they probably had a common ancestor, and then he goes to another animal and then another, and it was just that for like an hour or so.
What Can Atheist has been so boring for some time. I haven't watched any. So if you do a reaction to the Professor Dave part 20, I'll watch that.
Yeah. These ones with Professor Dave have been a little bit better, just because Professor Dave is so good. So I'll just see you guys in the next video, and yeah, thanks for watching.
Thank you.